What is up, everybody? Welcome to Recruiting is No Joke. I am your host, Joel Lalji, the realist recruiter. I got the sign, so it's official. No one else can be the realist recruiter. Everybody else out there is fake. So it's good to have you guys here. I'm super excited for this week's guest. We are going to delve into what I kind of am considering like a cross-generational battle at work right now. It's like we have such a divide. We've got people in their early 20s coming into the workforce, and I swear we got like 70-year-olds working as well. And when you have that much of a divide, we're going to have some issues. So we are going to get into some of these just kind of issues that can come up, and we're going to dig in deep to Gen Z entering in the workforce. And so I'm super excited. And today's guest is Danielle Farage. If you guys don't know Danielle is a top voice on LinkedIn, but she has taught workshops on how to work with Gen Z, essentially. And she's taught workshops for Microsoft, Northwestern, LinkedIn, garnered over 20 million impressions on social media. Like I said, she's a top voice on LinkedIn. Got an audience of 23,000 over there, mostly C-suite executives. And then she's also been able to travel the world as well as a digital nomad, which is very Gen Z. I love that. But Danielle is also just a great person. I met her several times in person. We also host a show together called Purple Acorn, and she's just down to earth, really, really chill, but also has a lot to say when it comes to Gen Z in the workforce, a lot of wisdom for us as well. And after spending several years herself in HR, she is now helping companies train them, giving them workshops. So Danielle, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here. What did I miss? Did I miss anything in that introduction? I'm sure I did.
I think you really captured it all, but
Was it
I
like
mean,
an
I will.
Emmy winning? Was that worth like like an
I
Emmy
I
speech?
feel like I owe you an intro because that intro was so nice and really just it was great. It was well rounded.
Where are you based out of? Where are you today? Give us an update on
Yeah.
that.
So usually I'm based out of New York City, best city in the world, but today I'm visiting Connecticut where my parents have a house
Cool.
and we're right on the lake, so I'm going to have a nice birthday weekend celebration with a bunch of
Hey,
friends
happy
up.
birthday.
Yeah.
Come on.
The vibes are high. The vibes are high. Thank you.
So
My
this
actual birthday is on
episode,
Tuesday.
well, this episode will air on Wednesday. It's technically, when people are listening to this, it's a day after your birthday.
Yeah, I'll be a
So
year older. So
yep, a whole year will have passed. This is the slowest production time ever.
too bad you're not getting me on the other end. I would have so much more wisdom to share. But you got the 25-year-old version.
I love it. Well, happy birthday. That is great to hear. Um,
Thank you.
how did you kind of get into this position of being kind of like an authority on Gen Z in the workplace? Like, how did this come
For sure.
about?
I grew up in New York City. I went to USC for college. I followed both my siblings there. And while I was at college, I was just really fascinated by seeing both my older siblings go from college to their careers and honestly really not have a great experience within the work cultures that they were in. I knew that it wasn't necessarily the type of work, but it was really the culture.
Yeah.
And so I decided because I wanted my major to actually be what I ended up doing in my life, I decided to study psychology and have a specific focus on social psych and leadership psychology. And I saw also like an increase in, this focus on organizational behavior and org psych and industrial psych. So essentially I went that route. And right before I graduated my senior year, I met this person and she gave me an internship and I found myself in a toxic work experience myself to
Let's
be.
break this down. What do we when we're
Yeah.
talking about toxic workplace? Give me an
Yeah.
example of what that means, because that gets thrown around a lot.
So I started the internship my second semester senior year and midway through the pandemic happened. So my internship and my school went remote. I was in New York. I was actually staying here in Connecticut. And one of the, I guess, examples is like my boss would not be afraid to text me at all hours of the night and the day about work. She
Wow.
would have me stay on after, our morning meeting with the team, which was it was a small team. It was like 4 of us, but she would ask me to stay on in front of other people every single day.
Mm.
And there was a point where she would say things like, my time is more valuable than yours. And you went to, a school that makes you entitled. And sort of these things that no one should be saying to you, especially a boss, especially someone who's supposed to be professional. And on top of that, I mean, I was also managing a team of like 10 interns who had never had an internship before. And part of the product was giving them an unpaid internship. So, in having their parents
Perfect.
pay for that, it was really unethical. And I ended up making a Benjamin Franklin list and being like, all right, what am I going to do here? Am I going to quit my job or am I going to stay? And at the top of my list for pros of leaving was my mental health going up, cons of staying, my mental health going down. And that was ultimately my decision to leave.
So
So
did you
about,
leave with no
yeah,
other job lined up, or you had another
no
job
other
lined up?
job lined up.
Okay.
And I didn't realize that it was kind of at a point where she was probably going to fire me anyway. And I was too stupid to realize that if I had stayed and let her fire me, I could collect unemployment. But you live and you learn.
You live and you learn. I was about to say.
Yeah. I'd rather do that earlier in life so that later on, if I ever work for a company again, I'll get those bigger checks. And then 3 weeks later, I got a job, luckily, at the startup. It was called Wade and Wendy for the HR tech folks that know it. It is it was an incredible company that was ultimately acquired by PandaLogic and Veritone. And I kid you not, the best experience working with that team. And it was full remote, but they had an office culture prior in New York City. So everyone was kind of based, in and around New York.
Yeah.
But there was just this feeling like, I was number 18 on the team. There was just this feeling like I was an equal. There was a feeling, from day one that they really cared about DEI. It was probably the third slide on their welcome page, right? Like their welcoming presentation that they gave me. And I also saw an alignment for the first time with me, and my career, and with the company. And I felt it so strongly. Plus, the leadership, Dave Meckelberg, like he's now at Voxel 51,
Shout
like
out to
the AI
Dave.
space. Dave, yeah, and Drew Austin. They're such great guys, and I really enjoyed it. And so, anyway, all's to say, I took the juxtaposition of those two experiences, and I was like, whoa, culture really matters. Like I was dead on.
Yeah.
And then at the same time at Wade and Wendy, I was leading our recruitment automation community, recruitment automation podcast with Max Notice. And we were hosting these conversations, these quarterly conferences, virtual conferences of TA, DEI, HR leaders, all these people leading the conversation about the integration of AI and human process. This is 2020, 2021, right? We were like ahead of the curve. And in that, leading of those communities and those conversations, I realized, whoa, Gen Z is missing from the conversation. If we're going to be reimagining work, we have to do it together.
Yeah.
And so that's really where it started. And ever since after that realization, I started to post on LinkedIn. I started to read a lot more about leadership, started going on Clubhouse and hosting rooms, right? When Clubhouse was a thing. And then
I wasted a lot of hours on Clubhouse, by the way. So, but you know what? Those skills though were valuable because it actually teaches you how to kind of facilitate and ask questions.
Right.
And
it's how I learned how to public speak. Yeah. I don't think that for the most part, any productive time is like a waste of time, right? Any of those experiences, like some people might say, oh, that first job was a waste of time. Yeah. But realistically, later on, it's always going to serve you in a way that you might not realize now.
From your perspective, and maybe for listeners who are out there, what are some of the sources or some of the leaders outside of yourself as well that are really leading the charge with this whole conversation around Gen Z in the workplace? Is there anybody that you would recommend or anyone that you've looked to and gone, yeah, you know what, they're really spot on here and they've got the perspective right?
Yeah, I will say one of my favorite people to work with, and we just launched a monthly morning show together, Sophie Wade. She focuses a lot on empathy. And I think that's a huge skill that's required for leading Gen Z and managing multi-generational teams. So I think her perspectives are really spot on. I love Denise Bruder from Sway Workplace. She speaks more about the work and the way that you get the work done and the how than specifically about organizations or specific generations. And then third, there's this guy, Jonas Stillman, who has really made his mark in the Gen Z space along with his dad, David Stillman. So they're like a duo
Mm.
and they do Gen Z speaking, I mean, full time. So they're really crushing it. But yeah, I would say those are a few people I look up to. I will also say I have some beef with Simon Sinek. And
Yeah.
I
Oh,
met
good
one
old
of his
Simon.
friends.
Good old Simon.
Yeah. I met one of his friends at a dinner like 2 weeks ago. And I
Okay.
shared with her, I was like, hey, like I have beef with your friend Simon, like he says some pretty out there things about Gen Z being not emotionally mature enough, especially in the context of work. And I really disagree with his framing of it. And I disagree with the way that he kind of makes a joke out of us.
To me, what's most interesting is being a millennial, a proud millennial. I remember when I was getting into the workforce, I would spend a decent amount of time on LinkedIn because one of my friends actually told me, like, hey, LinkedIn's an important network to be a part of. And I remember a lot of the content and conversation when I was entering the workforce. So this would have been 2010, 2011. There was so much negative talk around millennials. And I feel like actually a lot of the conversations around Gen Z are very similar to a lot of the stuff people were saying about millennials. And I remember there being a lot of articles, as there are for Gen Z, saying things like, this is how you manage, millennials. This is how you get the best out of millennials. And I remember probably the comment that sticks out most to me was this mockery of millennials living at home in their parents' basement. It was like this thing. And I've even been on calls with clients where this was maybe 7 or 8 years ago. I remember having it was myself and one of my coworkers were managing an account, and it was clear that the person who was, the client was a boomer. All right, it was clear. It was just clear as day. All right, and there's no age discrimination. It was just clear. But I remember him
We're not
making.
making jokes.
I remember him making the joke and being like, "Yeah, as long as you guys aren't living in your parents' basement still, or something like
Oh
that." And I was
God.
just like, "I can't believe you said that." But the reason I say that is because I've been looking at a lot of these articles, and we're going to look at some of these articles. We're going to look at some of these videos, and I think the word that just keeps coming up is entitlement. Entitlement. I hear it over and over, but I heard the same thing about millennials. And what I will say is 10 years later, what's happened now is millennials, we've kind of become more decision makers, and we're starting companies and we're doing all of these things. And now I see more and more complaints than ever before, usually from, more experienced candidates and more, people who have a lot of experience in the workforce, boomers, that are now going, well, there's age discrimination. For example, once you're over 50, it's impossible to get a job. What that highlights to me is the importance, like you said, of empathy and like understanding. I just don't think you can make just like massive judgments of huge groups of people. Like, you can't just say, oh, Gen Z, they're all entitled, right? Like, saying those things and making those blanket statements, it was the same as any other kind of ism in my mind. It'd be like me saying something negative about a whole group of people, whether it comes to race, age.
Right.
But I thought we could check out some of these posts, and I know you sent me a couple of them, and I found a couple, but I just want to get your take and like your thoughts around this. And I thought we could start off with everyone's good old friend.
Simon Sinek. No, I'm just
No,
kidding.
Simon Sinek just posts one-liners, so those are hard to find. So this is from an episode of Dr. Phil, who I actually with my wife the other day,
Gen
I
Z
called him Uncle
employees.
Phil because of the Fresh Prince of Bel Air, but it's Dr. Phil. All right, so you ready for? Are you ready
I
for
love
this? So
that.
so for anyone who's out there who can't see, you'll hear the audio in a second, but the headline on the screen right now says. And this was a headline that was put on by another company, and their headline is 95% of Gen Z employees can't keep a job because of social media. So that's the headline. So let's just listen up to this.
Gen Z employees.
No, we don't. It's been a nightmare with 95% of the ones that we have hired. I once terminated an employee, and her father called me 24 hours later asking how he could help his father this job back.
65% of employers say they have fired a Gen Z employee, and 50% of them say they fired them real recently.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons is social media. It's hard to do your
Social
job
media.
and work. You're on Instagram all day, even in corporate America. How
Just blame social media.
try to go above and beyond?
I have tried it.
And it's failed you? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, corporate has failed me.
Yeah.
So the problem
Yeah.
is there's something called paying your dues. And so when you say it's failed you, how long
Oh
did
my
you give
gosh.
it? 3 months? 6 months? I think you're failing yourself.
Gen Z
So-
employees.
Oh
okay.
my God.
I know.
Did you just say you're failing yourself?
She did, and look, I think if you haven't seen that episode, you should go check out the whole episode because it's actually a lot of different conversations. You know, people who are pretty prominent on social media are on there as well.
Crazy.
But what are your thoughts when you hear that 95% of the times that they've hired Gen Z, it hasn't worked out? Why is this? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know what kind of company this guy runs, but it seems to be super outdated if 95% of Gen Zers leave. I have so many questions about, what positions he's hiring them for. Is it high volume? Like, is it a barista job, right? Is like those roles, there's a really high turnover. And then I also have questions about what are the roles themselves? What are the responsibilities? Who do they report to? Do they have guidance? Do they have teams? Like, what is the environment that they're walking into? Oh my gosh, I have so many thoughts. But yeah, those are sort of my first initial questions that I would have for this guy.
What about your thoughts on, I'm assuming Gen Z lady that just said, hey, corporate's failed me. And I think there was a whole talk about like paying dues, right? When you hear
Yeah.
things like that, what goes through your mind?
Yeah, so I think we have to context set, right? So these people who are saying pay your dues and like whatever else they're going to say, they probably graduated into a very different time and context than any new grads today. And a very different system, right? So, for example, my mom, who's a boomer, she graduated into lifetime employment, pensions, training programs that's 6 months to a year long, 18
Totally.
months long sometimes. So there was this incentive to actually stay with a company. And now, fast forward, right? We're trying to apply those same principles and systems of promotions, of loyalty, of hard work and paying your dues to a world that has rapidly changed and will continue to rapidly change for the foreseeable future. Of course, yeah, we have social media, which is also painting a picture of the grass is always greener, which isn't a good thing. But I don't think that that's the reason why people are, can't get any work done. That's like
No.
a crazy thing to say.
And the irony
but-
of that is, like, if I look at my social media following, which I do on TikTok and Instagram, 80% of my following is over 30. So
Yeah.
I'm like, it's like when I go in a coffee shop, it doesn't matter if there's a group of teenagers in there or there's, a 60-year-old in there. Everybody is on their phones. I doubt if we went into a workplace that we would only one group of people is on social media. It's like everybody's wasting time on there.
Right. But also about the you're failing yourself comment, like, A, that's just so out of line. But B, if you really think about what she's saying, I have a question for you, right? Like, how many people do you know where the corporate ladder actually worked for them?
I think the corporate ladder has worked for many
At one
years.
company.
I know several people who are even my age who have like worked at a company for 20 years and worked there. Like, I've got one friend in mind who started as a salesperson at a company. Now he's the president of the company. That is something, to your point, that based on technology and based on even how like work relationships are forming, we are going through a transition. Like, if you ask me in a decade whether or not I think anybody is even, like, in my mind, I think a lot of people are going to be working contract or fractional, and they're going to be exchanging their skills or their results with companies. And you may have like a core group of people at a company, thinking of like a chief financial officer, chief marketing officer, like, people in these roles that are core to a business. And then you're going to have a lot of fractional people. That's what my thought is, where it's going. And we're in this transition point.
Mhm.
But I think, to your point, when I hear corporates failed me, I resonate with that a lot because I think corporate has failed a lot of people. And I think there's probably a lot more people now who are millennials and even boomers. And I see these comments on my social media all the time where they'll say, yeah, I was really loyal to a company for 25 years, 30 years. And then I got a notice, I'm laid off. And
Yep.
now I'm kind of
Yep.
stuck.
We're seeing that happen every
Daily.
single day right now.
Daily.
Yeah.
Particularly within corporate jobs, right? And I think when I hear that and I hear somebody saying, oh, well, how long did you give it? Like 3 months, 3 years. What I've also heard from just talking to a lot of people who are, earlier in their careers and, younger in the workforce is these environments are just not cohesive, and like whether it's a corporate environment or it's a manufacturing environment or it's a construction environment. I've also seen that a lot of these environments are just not inclusive to younger generations. And they'll say things like, well, we've always done it this way, or like, well, suck it up, I had to do this. And that does, that whole pay my dues thing, that
It's
gets
so
thrown out a lot.
toxic.
It's like when your grandparents tell you like, oh, I went to school barefoot with glass on. And
Right.
it's like, okay,
so does that
well,
mean I should do it too?
exactly. And I think the challenge is too is we're going through this transformation as well with what I see as productivity and results, where I think a lot of companies for years, for generations, have been focused on time in a location like equaling something. And now we're in a time where with AI and with automation and with technology that we have, that you can actually get a lot done in a shorter amount of time and be way more
Right.
productive. For people who have had to work hard or to like go to a place and work for 8 to 10 hours and that being the measurement of their work, I think it is kind of a scary thing for a lot of people, and them going, oh wow, like we're now in a world where you can work from anywhere in the world and be more productive than somebody in an office, which I
Right.
think is a transition point, right?
And I have a feeling like in that video that the guy that runs the company is probably running a company that's more about FaceTime and are you in
Sure.
the office? I also want to say something about the girl, right, who is probably his former employee, which is that her story is so similar to one I literally heard yesterday from one of my friends, where she spent 2 years at a company. All these people around her are getting promoted who aren't necessarily exceeding expectations. She's been exceeding expectations for 2 years in a row, has been asking, oh, like, I'd love to get promoted and like, I'd love to mature in the organization. And like, I really am looking forward to that and more responsibility. She's ready for it, obviously. And her boss is passing her up, like not even considering it. And she's getting so frustrated. And it's like, yeah, we are trying. Like, we're trying so hard to fit into your mold of what you believe is right. And I don't even believe with the 2-year promotion thing, because nowadays, I mean, you get so much more work done, to your point, with the tools. We're just so efficient. We find new ways to do things. We're constantly wanting to do more. That was another thing. She's like constantly asking senior leaders, oh, how can I help you on this and this and that? These bosses just like are being negligent. That's how I view it, is they're not paying attention. And then I have another friend who is on the opposite spectrum. She got promoted in her banking job a year early, which pissed off a lot of her class of like people who she started with, to a hedge fund about a year later. And her boss told her to take the interview. And then when she said, oh, I might actually accept the job offer, then told her, oh, you definitely shouldn't. Like the leadership right now who are leading Gen Z, at least from the examples that I'm seeing in my close network, they just don't know what to do. And so that's really why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Well, I think it's needed. It's this cross-functional generation or cross-generational teams that we're seeing. I think it's really easy to judge other generations, other people. It's easy to judge other people as it is, but particularly with age, we just see it repeated time after time after time. And I know that in 10 years, I promise you this, you're going to see a lot of the same headlines around Generation
sure.
Alpha. It'll be like the same thing. And again, with the technology of like, well, yeah, I can understand where Gen Z is going to be more technically savvy, and they're going to be using tools for productivity. And the problem is sometimes, again, because we view world from this like ancient lens of, okay, it's about how much time you're doing something versus the results. This is also a huge issue with remote work, where I think one of the reasons I've loved working remotely is because I'm able to get able to be more productive than I ever was in an office, because number one, my personality, but then number two, I'm not having a commute. So I'm curious. I'm going to play a video that I did because I like playing my own videos. But this came in the news this week as well. For anyone who is out there who's just listening, the headline I put on this video was "Return to Office Fail. Leaders say in-office work has helped their business, but still work remotely." So I won't play the whole video, but check this out, and then we'll have a quick chat about this. So, did you guys see this article about Zoom's chief people officer claiming that in-office work has helped the business become more successful, even though he himself actually works remotely? Yes, in this article, Zoom's people officer is saying how in-office work has really helped with creativity and collaboration, and it's really helped the business. But then in the same article says, I'm pretty sure I can just do my job remotely, so I'm remote.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, number one, why is anybody from Zoom talking about the benefits of in-office work when most of their clients use Zoom so they can work remotely? And then number two, how can you talk about all the benefits and why it's so important, and then in the same article admit that you actually work remotely? Because so I'm not going to play the rest of that, but what I thought was really interesting about this is, like, anybody I talk to who's in HR in particular, they're the ones who have had to like really lead the charge with bringing people back to the office. And a lot of them have even said, like, hey, even though I can do my job remotely, I'm going to be in the office because I'm in a people function, and it's a little bit unfair, or whatever you want to call it, to have like your engineers or whoever, your marketing people in the office, because they're going to be more productive in the office. But as the people leader, I'm just going to stay home. You guys do your thing. So I'd love to hear from a Gen Z perspective. Like, what's Gen Z leaning towards? Are they like, hey, we want remote work in office? Like, what are you seeing out there?
Gen Z is desiring that in-person, on a intentional level, interaction with the office. And if that means hybrid, right? Like, I think the ideal for the average Gen Zer is like 2 to 3 days. It's not different from any other generation, right? It's like 2 to 3 days in office, and sort of this flexible mentality. Like, if I want to go to a different state and visit my cousins, or I want to maybe go abroad globally, I know that's a little bit more challenging with taxes and stuff, but if I wanted to do something remotely for 2 to 3 weeks, then I could do that, and that there wouldn't be a problem with it, and the team could still function as long as it's not near any like critical points in the year, right? And so I think that would be the ideal timing. The other thing about that video, and to your point about this guy like saying in the same exact video that he's remote, I think that's extremely hypocritical. And Gen Z looks at that, and there's a complete loss of trust. Because if you're telling me to do something, then I want to see you leading the charge and doing it the same way.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's unfair because you're just assuming that I can't handle, a different way of working. It's kind of undermining to my own, I guess, sense of self. Like, you don't think I know myself enough to like work remotely. You don't trust me enough to work remotely. And I just think that's bogus.
I thought the same thing, and even when I heard that Zoom was getting people back in the office, I was like, what on
Right.
earth? Like, out of every company in the world, Zoom should never. They should
Right.
all be working remotely.
I mean, it reminds me of 2021 when Apple announced going back to the office,
I know.
in a hybrid capacity. And I said to myself, well, that doesn't make any sense because they're enabling us to all work
I know.
remotely. So what the fuck?
Well, it's like,
what's the point?
And all these leaders too, a lot of them were like, and I actually had a conversation with a lot of really high level HR leaders in the Chicago area recently, and we were talking about this whole thing, and a lot of them had said like hybrid is where we're falling, and it just seems to work. It seems to be the preference that kind of meets most people's needs, unless they were hired remotely. during the pandemic, and then we're kind of like letting people work remotely. They said that like the biggest challenge is just getting the messaging right. And I think one of the worst things companies did, and they did the same thing with DE&I, is they make really big statements in moments that are really just PR statements and marketing, but they're not actually like lived core values. And what happens is expectations go up. And I just remember Meta saying, "Hey, everyone's going to work remotely forever because it's just working so well." And it's like articles in the news where they're saying this stuff. And to your point, it's like the trust erodes. And I think we're actually at that point now, just in general, where corporate trust is just at an all-time low. And this isn't a Gen Z thing. It's just across the board. We're losing this trust. And it's because people say things that sound good in the moment and popular, and then they don't live them out. And so what I asked these HR leaders was like, what are you going to do when suddenly the hiring landscape gets more competitive, which it will at some point? It will just be most companies will be looking to hire for these corporate positions, and it will get competitive again because that's how it's always been. Would you change and go fully remote because it's easier to recruit new talent? Or would you just keep with hybrid, even if it made recruiting harder? And they were all like, my God, I don't even want to think about that. That's kind of what I'm almost predicting is remote work will make sense when it's convenient for companies. But to your point earlier, it's like it just erodes that trust even more, right?
Yeah. And we don't forget, right? The RTO push, I think that is coming in the fall, will stick with people, right? Like we won't forget what companies said one thing and did another. Microsoft is a great example, especially when it comes to Gen Z, because we do value DEI the most out of any generation when it comes to a job search, right? We are the most culturally and ethnically diverse generation of all time. So obviously we're going to value DEI. We want to feel like we belong. And I think that was the biggest shock of the week for me, to see them pull back. And, last week's shock was SHRM, but I kind of saw that one coming because I had my own problem with SHRM last November. That is a story that I have been waiting to drop. Might happen eventually.
Yeah, you should do it at a SHRM conference. You should get on.
Be like, all right. Oof.
Well, okay, so I got a couple more here. I want to look at this one finally. So I did a poll today. So for anyone who follows me on LinkedIn, I love the polls. I love the polls because you get really funny comments, but also the engagement is always good. So I did this through my business page. So anyone who wants to go check out this, we're looking at a poll that I did on LinkedIn through the Realist Recruiter Recruiting is No Joke podcast page. If you don't follow that, go follow that page. I put out a ton of content. I wrote in there, I didn't want to stir the pot with this one. Of course I did. And then I admit, actually I did. But this is for a podcast I'm recording. Oh, and I said, if you're bold, leave a comment too. And the question in the poll is, which generation is hardest to work with? And we've got 284 votes so far in 38 minutes. So this one will probably be interesting, and lots of comments as well. But right now, and you were right, because we were talking about this before, shame on the boomers. 53% of people actually say that boomers are the hardest to work with.
That's hilarious.
Which makes sense. And I don't know if you ever worked with a boomer when it comes to like technology and just having to explain things over and over.
I have 2 boomer parents.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Can you show me how to do this email again? What's this?
For the 10th time? Yeah, sure.
How do I program my phone again? But then Gen Z is second on there, 29%. And so someone said,
can I choose more than one?
Chris Williams, who is a legend. I love Chris. He says, not going to fall for this one. Generational stereotyping is lazy. No one is simply their age. There are great people and shitty people to work with in every generation.
Well, I wonder why boomers get the most votes then. Giving people a choice.
Laurie Golden said she feels proud to be Gen Z, which only 5% of Gen X, which then only 5% of Gen X.
I agree with that. I love working with Gen Xers.
Gen Xers are always super chill. Go check out that. I thought I'd do that in preparation for the podcast because it's always funny to get real time.
I think one of the reasons why Gen X is so easy to work with is because they're fluid. Like they had to take shit from boomers. But then when it came to millennials, they were like, well, I can hang with you. Like, teach me the newest tech. Like I'm down, they're this sort of fluid generation
Generational
where they're
fluid.
like water.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're like oil in the wheel. They make things run.
All the Gen X's I know, like you said, they're always super chill. They're not really like emotional necessarily, and they kind of got like tough skin, but then also like do have the empathy as well. And obviously,
Right.
like Chris said, and like we even discussed, like you don't want to put everybody in like a bucket, but
Yeah.
also, it's LinkedIn, so you got to do a
The
poll.
people are polling.
I'm
Let them
exactly
poll.
people polling, people leaving comments. So that's what I like to see. Okay, last one we're gonna look at here. We were gonna do another one, but we don't really have time here. This one is kind of going back to the hybrid work life, and I think there was another article that you sent me as well. But this whole idea about what's on time, this is shifting, right? And it apparently Gen Z now are showing up like 5 to 10 minutes late, depending, late meaning after the start of a meeting. And this is now happening a lot in hybrid environments. So maybe you're commuting in and you get late. And what it's showing is what you described earlier, which was this desire for flexibility. What are your thoughts with here? Like, first of all, what's your idea of on time, why this is happening, or what's actually going on here?
I think that with this whole hybrid thing, right? I think it's time kind of gets confusing because people are treating hybrid in different ways. So, for example, someone who's in like a 2-3 hybrid environment, they're probably coming to the office. And I don't know if they're coming to the office. It's either like they're coming maybe later in the day, maybe some of them are coming earlier so they don't really see anyone, and then they have some FaceTime, and then they go home early and get the rest of their work done. So people are kind of treating the office in new ways and different ways than we've ever seen before. And because of that, lots of people are coming in at different times. When it comes to Gen Z, I feel like because other people are treating time and being on time in more of a leisurely, laid back way, and there's different interpretations, we're going to follow suit. Like, we're just going to follow what we see unless it's explicitly explained. When it's 9 a.m., you have to be at work at 9 a.m. And I did a poll recently too, like this past week, about the same thing, right? What is the meaning of showing up on time? A majority of the respondents said within 5 minutes of the set time is still on time. And I think it's kind of different for meetings than it is for showing up to the office. Because, when you show up to the office, it's like everyone's rolling in. It's not as strict. So I don't really think it's a big deal. But if companies want people to show up at the same time, then they have to be explicit about like why, right? Like, why do I have to show up exactly at 9 a.m., not 9:05? Like, is it because we have some sort of meeting?
Yeah, we got a pizza
like
party.
An all hands.
You didn't hear it? We got a
Pizza party at 9 a.m.
So look,
Yeah, so this
you're
is
a
the
LinkedIn poller, so I figured I'd poll it. So if anyone who out there says what classifies as on time to work, and then the actual poll says what's the definition of on time. So we got early, within 5 minutes of set time, 45 minutes still on time. I will say within 5 minutes of the set time. Oh, all right. So 67% of
Yeah.
people agreed with me. I mean, like you said, it depends on the meeting, right? Because it's like if it's a client meeting, man, I'm there early because that's just
Right.
like their client, they're paying. I don't know if if someone was like, "Hey, we're having a meeting at 11 in the office, till 1 or whatever, however long that meeting is." I'd definitely try and get there as close to on time as possible. But if I was within 5 minutes, I don't think I'd be like, "Oh my God, I'm late." But funnily enough, I actually, kind of talking about toxic work environments, I remember working at a company, and it was kind of during the same time period that you had your toxic work environment kind of situation come up, and it was right around COVID. And I started a job, and the two people who were training me, they were kind of like my age, I would assume, or like maybe a little bit younger. But we had someone else who was in our group, and she was older. She was happy to tell us that, which is fine. But I remember on the first day of work, she showed up 15 minutes late. But the reason is because she was new to the area and wasn't, hadn't, this is the first time she'd ever made that commute. in that way, like brand new to the area, and they just happened to be doing road work on the road that she took in. And I remember how it was handled. It was just terrible. It was like super embarrassing. Like they called her out in front of me and were like, "Do you know being on
Oh
time means
God.
you 15 minutes before work you need to be at your desk?" And I go, "All right, guys, like I hear what you're saying here, but like you never even communicated that. So you never even
Yeah.
said that." And I was like, "You got to, number one, have a little bit of respect. Like she just moved here, you know, and all this other stuff." And obviously it was a red flag for both of us in that moment. We both kind of knew like, wow, this is a weird work environment. There's a lot of truth in that, right? Like you've got to set those expectations. And at the end of the day, if you're running meetings and you want people there at 8 a.m. and that's when the meeting's starting, then I think just communicating that is fine, and saying like, look, maybe if you expect people to be there 10 minutes early, like communicate that. And I think this is where a lot of this stuff breaks down, is like, I just think we're so bad at communicating it. You know, communicate. Well, it's hybrid. Is it 2 days, 3 days, 4 days? Communicate.
It's funny because it reminds me too of when we were at Transform a few months ago. There was this panel about Gen Z, and one person was from a bank, and the topic was like, how are you upskilling and training and developing this generation? And one of them was like, oh yeah, we started to do etiquette training for Gen Zers.
Interesting.
And part of me was like a little bit offended by the word and the terminology. Like, oh, like we don't have any etiquette. Okay, that's kind of interesting. But the point being, I think they're trying to set the expectations
That's what it is.
for them in the industry, which I think is a good idea. And it actually sparked my own thinking about what are the skills, the relevant skills that Gen Z needs to really improve, but that the organization can help them and potentially bring me in to talk about and to teach them those critical skills. So I've started to develop some workshops around what are those critical skills where I notice, you know, there is a gap and that there is a need for not only for the managers to learn, you know, how to work with Gen Z, but for the Gen Zers to really learn and have those skills to be able to work with other generations and to thrive with whether it's a traditional work environment or it's something more modern.
I think that type of training, honestly, for any new employee should happen, because I think, and I used to see this all the time as a recruiter. Like as a recruiter, I'm trying to prep people for their interviews.
Yeah.
So one of the big things I talk about is, hey, look, here's the vibe of the company. Like you're going to show up to this interview in a full suit because that's how everybody else is dressed. And I would coach people on this, because the worst thing you could have is somebody shows up in a full suit to an interview and everybody else is wearing t-shirts that's interviewing them, or vice versa.
Right.
In some ways, I don't think etiquette's like the best, because when I think of etiquette, I just think of like you said, like manners, or like how you know, using my knife and fork the right way or something. That's what I think of. But like, honestly, like just training on like what's your culture like. And
Yeah.
a lot of the videos I do on TikTok have become more of like just explaining like the corporate game. And like, you know, we were talking about promotions earlier. It's like, look, you want to get promoted. Truth is, it doesn't matter how hard you work. It doesn't really matter even the results that you get. It's literally about who you connected with, and that
Mhm.
person that's making the decision. Do they know you? Like, and what
Yeah.
happens is school will teach you. And I went to school, so I know what school teaches. School teaches you input equals output, and they don't ever really teach you about office politics or
Gaming the system.
gaming the system or networking, how valuable these things
Yeah.
are. And so I think companies, even if they're onboarding or even in their recruitment process, I've been talking about this a lot as well, like talking about your culture in a real way. So your recruiter isn't just like, yeah, this is the greatest place to work and you're going to love it here, blah, 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 selling them on everything. Instead, the recruiter's painting an accurate picture of what the place is like to work
Right.
at. And then as a Gen Z or whoever's interviewing, they could literally go, you know what, that actually doesn't sound like a place that I would work well in. And that's okay. And the problem is we've had like recruiters selling people in these roles. Companies are selling their culture like it's an amazing thing. But let's just face it, like not every culture is the same for every single. Each individual will have a different experience with a culture. And I think these are the types of things, like you said, setting expectations that are crucial within interview process, onboarding, and all of that type of stuff as well.
Yeah. And sticking by those. You know, if you're going to set an expectation and say something, right? Like Zoom is a great example. If you're going to tell people to be back in the office, then I want to see you doing it too. right? And I think
100%.
Gen Z is really, really sensitive to that. That's what we're looking to see more of, is this leadership that doesn't just talk and demand we do things, but actually acts accordingly and sticks by their word.
Well, and the great thing is nowadays you can, and again, this is a big shift, which I don't think corporate has really adapted to, and that is TikTok and Instagram and these platforms where you can go viral talking about like actual experiences. This is something new, like when I started in the workforce, it was literally like, oh, I had a terrible day because my boss was treating me terrible. There's nothing I can do. Nowadays, like literally, you could talk about your experience and name and shame the brand and bring a whole slew of things. And I think a lot of people look at that as it's whining, it's complaining, it's entitlement. I think people will have that view, but the way I honestly view it is like, look, people have a voice now, which means now there actually needs to be accountability. And yes, I actually don't think that having, when you're paying the dues, like I actually don't think that is a helpful thing. And I know that when I was paying the dues, a couple of the places that I paid the dues for, they actually ended up getting sued because paying the dues wasn't actually ethical. Like it wasn't ethical to
Wow.
ask us to come in at 6 a.m. and stay till 8 p.m. without pay, just because that's what the managers have been doing for years. That type of behavior, right? So I love the accountability. I love everything. I love a lot about what Gen Z brings to the workforce. And I think obviously just being a fan of social media, I'm excited that there's like voices popping up, because I think
Yeah.
a lot of those voices just never existed. And I think a lot of what's being said is just stuff which, if we're honest, most of us would probably have said similar things if we had a platform to be able to do that, right?
Right. And I think, to your point, going back to like, why do people post on social media? Like, of course they have a story, but they also have a story to share with other people. And that's the thing about Gen Z that I think is often overlooked is, sure, it would be nice to go viral and
Can be
launch a
nice.
new career. It can be nice, but it comes from this motivation to improve the world and make other people's lives easier and make other people feel less alone, because we know what it feels like to be alone and depressed and anxious and all the things and struggling and not have another person to rely on. I disagree with this commentary out there that exists that says, oh, Gen Zers have never been through anything tough in their lives, right? And they don't know what trauma is, and they don't know what, they're not emotionally intelligent, they don't know anything. It's like, actually, you have it completely wrong. We're able to name things because we're learning. We're on TikTok, we're informing ourselves, we are more aware. And we grew up at a time where we had the internet to learn how to deal with less socially emotionally aware and parents, and we had to navigate those situations. I had to go to therapy, I had to get my own personal coach. And I think those things that make Gen Z who we are often overlooked. And of course there's going to be people within a generation, I don't agree with a lot of the protests that are going on and have been going on since October 7th. There are people that are on the other side that aren't aware, aren't asking questions, aren't critical thinkers. But to that
But
person's
that's
point, to Chris's point, like
that's in
we're not
every
a monolith.
generation. That's
Yeah,
in any generation, right? And it's in
totally.
any group of people, there's going to be people that are doing positive things, and there's going to be people who are doing negative things. I think it's that empathy piece, which is huge. And it's like just taking the time to get to understand people and understand things without just making like just a pure judgment in a moment. And any other videos I do around Gen Z, like the comment, what the comments are going to be as well. Well, that's the best place that people can find out more about Danielle and what are you going to be up to in the next couple of months in terms of like traveling and all of that good stuff.
You can find me on my website, daniellefarage.com. Also on LinkedIn, I do a newsletter called The Snowflake Generation, and talks all about Gen Z, talks about like my perspectives about what's going on in the world and the industry. Next few months are a little bit quiet because my brother and his wife are having a baby. I'm becoming an aunt in early August, so literally like
Love it.
T-minus 2 weeks. But I am heading to Nashville that is exciting.
For
And
RecFest?
potentially,
Cool,
yeah,
cool.
it's we're talking about it. And then also for a young leadership conference next month.
Awesome.
So I'm going to Nashville 2 months in a row, which will be fun. And
Nash Vegas.
yeah, just give me a shout on LinkedIn, Instagram. I'm the same, Danielle Farage, on all platforms.
Well, we'll put your website on there, and then guys, if you connect with Danielle on LinkedIn, just be mindful. She's not just hanging out on LinkedIn all day. That's my job. So just be patient. Let her know that you heard her on the podcast, and then check out Purple Acorn as well. That is a show that myself, Danielle, and Adam Posner, we are all hosting. So you're going to see more and more about that. Super excited for that, and to be able to work with Danielle on that as well.
Tuesdays at 10 a.m.
Tuesdays, 10 a.m. It's going to be coming out, and so we're super pumped about that. And then once again, guys, thank you so much. If you made it this far, thank you so much for listening. Thank you to the sponsors for the show. Thank you to everybody that makes this possible behind the scenes. We'll be back next week with another guest. And as always, if you're interested in being on the show, please reach out to me. And for any other information, you can go to www.therealistrecruiter.com. You can find all past episodes along with all of the stuff that I do if you want to work with me one-on-one as well. So Danielle, thank you so much for your time. Happy birthday. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. Thank you for taking the time, and we will talk soon.